What's up, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Celtics Talk podcast here on the NBC Sports Boston podcast network. A lot to get to, mostly regarding Bradley Beal, which is why I had to call my buddy Chris Miller at NBC Sports Washington. He's been on the program like 14 times in the past 3 months. You've probably seen him on Early Edition and BST because we just keep bugging him. Like, is this a thing that could actually happen? And I think you'll notice for the first time, Chris is sort of relenting that the Wizards have a tough decision in front of them, and Bradley Beal is probably pondering his next move. And it'll be interesting to see if the Celtics can swoop in. We're also going to dive in to some of your questions. Put it up on Twitter. I asked you guys to send me some questions we could tackle on this week's pod. And, well, wouldn't you know it, a lot of Bradley Beal inquiries, because, again, it's the big story right now, besides Team USA losing and Evan Fournier's big game. We'll get into some of that as well. But I want to just going to kind of rip open the mailbag because a lot of what I was going to talk about is what's on your mind. And the first response, Sean B. Collins, can the Celtics trade for Bradley Beal without giving up Jaylen Brown? And essentially, this is the big question for Boston, because with the Celtics moves this offseason and the trade of Kemba Walker, they have positioned themselves where they can add a third star with the right moves and the right cap management without necessarily having to trade part of that Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown core. And so one of the things I push back on often is you'll hear Cedric Maxwell was on our air, and I love Max, but he wants to trade Jaylen Brown to go get a Bradley Beal or another elite player of that ilk. And I just don't think you have to do that. It comes down to a simple math equation to me. Do you want Jaylen Brown, Jayson Tatum, and a third star who might not be to the level of Bradley Beal, but it could be pretty comparable? It could be someone, even better along the timeline of your young core. Or do you want to give up a Brown, and now you've got you still only have necessarily what I would call a big two? You'd still have maybe more pieces of your core or your supporting cast. You could have Marcus Smart and Evan Fournier stick around in that instance if you trade Jaylen Brown. But whereas if you go the cap route, you can't necessarily keep those players. And so just some interesting decisions for Boston ahead. And some of that might not be determined until you get into the season. But so here's essentially the way it is, that if you wanted to make a trade for Bradley Beal, here's what has to happen. Bradley Beal has to come out and say, I'm not going to pick up my final year option after this season, and I intend to become a free agent and pursue other options. At that point, the Washington Wizards, Tommy Shepard, their GM, have to start looking around the league and determining whether there is a package out there that they are willing to take on that would move Bradley Beal. Now, why you're hearing this in the ramp to the draft, because there are teams like Golden State that have picks and young players and can put together a potentially curious collection that maybe the Wizards would be willing to move off of Bradley Beal and start a rebuilding process. But the way the Celtics swoop in without having to give up Jaylen Brown, because if you're going to match one of the better packages out there, you are going to have to throw Jaylen Brown on the table. If you want to do that without having to give up Jayson or Jaylen, the way you do it is Bradley Beal comes out after saying he's not going to pick up that option. He's also going to just sort of let it be known, whether it's through him, his agent, just the media in general, hey, I'm only re-signing with one team. The Boston Celtics is where I want to be. I want to play with Jayson Tatum. And now if I'm the Golden State Warriors, I'm not trading all these assets without necessarily knowing I have a commitment from Bradley Beal. And if he's just going to walk after this season and go sign with the Celtics in free agency, then there's a little bit more trepidation. Now the Wizards are in a position where they're going to just look for any amount of assets in return without losing a Bradley Beal. And so then the Celtics could come to the table, whether that's some combination of, Marcus Smart and Evan Fournier, resigned Evan Fournier, and then young talent, Aaron Nesmith, Robert Williams, and just a gaggle of picks. Then you could move this year. Maybe it's Al Horford's partially guaranteed contract and all those picks with some young talent sprinkled in. There's a bunch of combinations you can do to make that deal a reality. Again, is that ideal for Washington? No. And Bradley Beal would be doing a little bit of the Anthony Davis power play, but there is a path where Bradley Beal lands in Boston without the Celtics having to give up Jaylen Brown. And if you're the Celtics, really, that's the only way you're considering doing that, at least during the 2021-22 season. And then you get to free agency after that, you can figure it out. But for me, I'll continue to say it. I think there's not a lack of disrespect. I just think people aren't valuing what Jaylen Brown brings to this team. And he just keeps getting thrown in these fake trade scenarios. And I'm thinking, how does that make the Celtics better? yes, you're getting a quality player in return, but Jaylen Brown is on a path, especially at only 24 years old, to being an elite player in this league, on a sweetheart of a deal now that the Celtics re-signed him. And if I'm Brad Stevens and I'm building this thing out, I want my core to be Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and whatever player that is. And maybe you get into this year, maybe that's Evan Fournier, maybe that's Marcus Smart, maybe that's Robert Williams, and you use your resources just to sort of build it up from what you have internally. But there's always going to be this allure of getting another third star, an elite player like a Bradley Beal. All right, let's keep going with these questions. J Tatum Burner, which, I thought that should be an account that just sends Bradley Beal loving messages. But do you think we have a chance of getting Reggie Bullock? And so you might have heard a report, I think last week, indicated that the Celtics might be interested in Reggie Bullock. And I'll just say this, unless Evan Fournier is not back, I don't have a roadmap to that happening. Like, unless Reggie was willing to take a insane discount and play for the mid-level, the taxpayer mid-level of $5.9 million, I think his price will be much higher on the open market. And so I don't see that becoming a reality. And even, Evan Fournier is the better player. And that maybe some of that is recency bias as he comes off this big game against Team USA. But, that would be a move where, for whatever reason, you weren't willing to pay to splurge on Fournier and bring him back, or another team just outbid you, and now you're scrambling to figure it out. Maybe then you'd use the higher mid-level because you wouldn't necessarily be a taxpayer next season. Maybe Reggie Bullock becomes an option at that point. I still think there'll be better options out there, but certainly you're looking for shooting, you're looking for help at that position. I think that's why you'll see the Celtics invariably scouring the market for what is out there. Let's keep going with your questions. Do you think we have the Celtics point guard of the future on the roster already? That is from Nucci Wallace, or at Nucci Wallace. And he says specifically Peyton Pritchard. So I think the Celtics point guard of the future could potentially be Marcus Smart. I'm intrigued to see what handing Marcus the full reins this season allows him to do. He's played a lot of point guard in the past, but you've always had a primary ball handler, whether it was Isaiah Thomas or Kyrie Irving or Kemba Walker. Besides filling in those injury sequences, Marcus hasn't always been sort of the guy in that spot. I think his playmaking is criminally underrated. And I'm intrigued to see what Marcus can do when the Celtics can go to him. And now Brad Stevens sits him down and says, all right, Marcus, you're our guy. Like, your job is to make Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown better. They've had chemistry. They've had, all this time together. Can Marcus elevate their games? Can he find ways to settle in himself and not necessarily take as many shots, right? Like, Marcus Smart as primary point guard and playmaker has to downshift at times and realize he can't just take as many 3-pointers as he might. And part of that, I understand, frustrates Celtics fans. I still want him to be aggressive. I still want Marcus Smart, who has shown he's an above average 3-point shooter in recent seasons, to take those shots when he's confident, when he's open. But certainly there's a balance that has to come. And if he does that, then maybe Marcus Smart is your point guard of the future. The Celtics have the ability this offseason to re-sign him, essentially extend him for 3 more seasons off of his current deal. For 4 more seasons, excuse me. So almost $20 million a year if they did that, and you'd be locking up again another core piece of the puzzle. So, that's the big thing here. So the Celtics, one thing I think people have to understand is whatever moves they make this offseason, if they re-sign Evan Fournier, if they extend Marcus Smart and Robert Williams, that will not preclude them from making trades for a third piece. Like, they could use those now probably good contracts to go make a move. But it also could be a scenario where those are the guys that they're going to ride forward with. Like, if Marcus Smart comes out and Evan Fournier looks better outside of what we saw with COVID at the end of last season, and really settles in here and figures out his role, if he's okay with not being the primary focus the way he is on France, and excelling, can find the right way to balance that out. And then with Robert Williams' development, you guys know, if you're tuning in here, I think he's going to be an all-star. Then maybe there is a path forward with that core, and maybe you'll have all 5 of your what I would call your primary guys under contract long-term for 4 years into the future. And so that's not the worst spot to be in. And you would still have the ability, again, to audible and move in different directions. If Marcus Smart isn't your point guard of the future, I'm guessing it's outside the organization right now. I think Peyton Pritchard is going to be a high-level role player in the NBA. I think the fact that he can shoot 41% as a rookie bodes really well for where he's headed. Can he direct an offense and be the first unit guard? I don't know. Like, I think he's more in that combo mold right now. But guys, like, look, players develop and tweak their game, and I think he has a unique calmness about his game in terms of how he's able to probe and what he does. So I'm intrigued to see what Peyton Pritchard's path is. But I do think if it's not Marcus Smart, the Celtics point guard of the future is probably outside of the organization. All right. Daily Celtics Brazil asked about, can Bradley Beal pull an Anthony Davis type of situation and force his way to Boston? Look, we just went through that. I think that's certainly a possibility. It's not the way that Bradley Beal typically operates, but hey, when you're 27, 28 years old, or what, as you get into the second half of your career here, like, you're thinking about, like, how can I maximize this time? Bradley Beal is in his prime for a very short time here, and he's got to figure out, what comes next and who does he want to play with. And so that's decisions. That's tough. Sometimes you got to look out for yourself in that instance. And I know how much he loves Washington. You're going to hear Chris Miller come up, and we're going to get into that a little bit, but maybe it just comes down to Bradley Beal says, you know what, I just want to play with Jayson Tatum. That's what will make me happy. And maybe that opens the path to an acquisition. And Daily Celtics Brazil also asks, if Fournier is going to have a really good Olympics, how does that affect him and re-signing in Boston? And so this is funny because we're all sitting there watching the game yesterday, right? And it's natural to sit there and go, Evan Fournier just had a monster game, 28 points, hits the go-ahead three-pointer off, mind you, that hustle by Gershon Yabusele, diving on the floor to save that possession and lead to the go-ahead three-pointer that allows France to take down the U.S. What a crazy sequence, by the way. Just Gershon, who was cut from the Celtics essentially in 2019, waived. He's still on the books this season. They stretched him over 3 years. That was the player they were hoping would be French Draymond, a guy with hustle and trying to play defense. He still is not probably a everyday NBA player based on what I saw. And, there's still strides to make, but man, I was intrigued by that hustle. But anyway, Evan Fournier makes that go-ahead three-pointer, finishes with a monster game. And yeah, it's like naturally you sit there and go, wow, is some team going to pay him $20 million a year after watching him torch Team USA? I don't think general managers make declarations on 40 minutes, but there's a recency bias with all of us. And so I think there will be interesting to see what Evan Fournier's market is. That's the big question. I don't think the Celtics are ready to pay him. They might have to even overpay him a little bit if they want to get him on a shorter term deal that gives them a little flexibility. Like, could you do a 1-and-1 or a 2+1 where, you have an option to get out of that deal if you need to go use that cap space to pursue Bradley Beal or whoever that next available free agent is. The problem is if Evan Fournier is more like what matters to him is having security, having to know what his future is the next 4 years. So if he wants 4 years and $17 million, are you willing to go 4 years? I think the Celtics are willing to go $17 million a year. I just don't know if they're going to be in position to go there. But again, he would also be a tradable asset. So that's all part of the balance. Could you get him for 2 years, but have to pay $20 million a year? Maybe you're not as comfortable going to that $20 million number, but it gives you a little bit more flexibility moving forward. So that's all part of the balance that comes. Now, if a team like the Knicks, who are maybe known for some overreactionary signings, come in and throw $22 million on the table, maybe there is a point where Brad Stevens just has to walk away. And that would be tough because the Celtics don't have a lot of avenues to immediately adding talent. And I think that's why they have to be ready to pay. And that Kemba Walker deal promotes some a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more of an ability to go pay to retain Evan Fournier this offseason. But I think that's critical. Like, ever since Gordon Hayward left, and even when Gordon Hayward was injured, the Celtics haven't had that shooter, that playmaker, that guy who could really help them out. And I wonder if they'll be willing to pay just that much more because they're intrigued to see if Olympic Evan Fournier could be the sort of guy here. The other question there is, like, can Evan Fournier thrive when he's not the focal point? And I don't know the answer to that question. He's never had to be sort of the fourth option the way he would be here in Boston if they align the whether it's Tatum and Brown or other stars out there. So fair to wonder if that will happen. All right, Michael Goen, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, or Goen at MGOOEN. Will Tristan Thompson be a Celtic in 2021-22? And if not, what can the Celtics get for him? I think there's a world where Tristan Thompson is back, in part because the Celtics cannot afford to give up assets to move off of Tristan Thompson's money. They did that last year where they traded Enes Kanter, my guy, to the Portland Trailblazers as part of a little three-way deal that saw the 30th pick in the draft end up in Memphis. And Memphis got Desmond Bane, one of the better rookies. Not only do you need those picks to get young talent and infuse around your core, but you need first-round picks, especially deeper into the future, because you need those to go pursue that next star. And if Bradley Beal does become available, you can't have given up another first-round pick just to get off of Tristan Thompson's money. We talked last week. Is there a scenario? John Corrales threw this out. Could the Lakers take on Tristan Thompson and bring him to Los Angeles, a spot that he's very familiar with, and get him as a backup center? There's certainly potential there, but the money and all that makes it tough. And he threw out the idea of moving Kuzma, and I don't think they're going to move him for a backup. So I'll be very fascinated to see if there's a market out there for Tristan Thompson. But the Celtics certainly don't want over $40 million committed to centers. And especially if you're going to extend Robert Williams after this year, all of a sudden the commitment at that center position. And while Tristan Thompson comes off the books after this season, it's just, you want to ride with Al Horford, Robert Williams, and, whatever else. And Tristan Thompson, I don't know if he fits into that mold of what they need moving forward. So very interested to see if they can trim that $9 million. It becomes even more untenable to add someone like Fournier at a higher price value. Now you're not pushing necessarily as high into the tax, which has to be a consideration this year. So all part of the puzzle as they try to put this thing together. I don't ever envy what Brad Stevens has ahead of him. All right, Andre, R781 says, do you think the Celtics would or should go after a veteran point guard in free agency or via trade? I do think it has to be near the top of the priority list. If you guys have been following along on NBC Sports Boston, kind of throwing out some ideas as we've gone along here early in the offseason, I've said Patty Mills. Again, we keep talking about, will someone's value go up because of how good they've been at the Olympics? Well, Patty Mills had a monster game against USA in exhibition, has been big for Australia at the start of these Olympic games. I do think if the Celtics could get him at that sort of taxpayer mid-level money, that would be an amazing find, not only because he gives you a little ball handling, obviously brings the shooting aspect. He played for Ime Udoka in San Antonio, has a relationship there. Patty is also regarded as just a great veteran, and the energy that he brings, I think it would be fantastic for the Celtics to find a point guard like that. But there's no shortage out there. There's just point guards really everywhere, as low as people joke, but I love Ish Smith, and I think he could be a great ball handler for this team and gives you a little scoring. You don't have to play him. He always kills the Celtics when he goes up against them. Could you go the trade route, call Sacramento, maybe a DeLon Wright, someone who has a little bit more size, who gives you that balance of scoring burst, but also can be a playmaker? I think they do need someone without Kemba Walker. As much as you can lean on Marcus Smart, Peyton Pritchard, even though Jayson and Jalen are going to handle the ball, and Evan Fournier, if he is back, will have a larger role with the ball handling. I think they need to go pursue that. And the other name we just keep throwing out there is Tomas Satoransky, who playing for the Czech Republic right now in the Olympics. But Celtics have that Gordon Hayward trade exception. They could take his money in, give essentially $10 million of cap relief to the Bulls, who have to figure out what they're doing moving forward. And so I'll be very interested to see what they do with the point guard depth chart and how they can add somebody that is out there. All right, keeping along those lines, Eddie, the podcast Chad FB at Truth Faustino asks, in what priority should the Celtics be calling the Bulls for Tomas, Patty Mills, and Rudy Gay's agents? The Grizzlies about Kyle Anderson and TJ McConnell's agent. Who is your most important free agent trade target? I kind of love this question because I need to prioritize. When me and Corrales on last week's pod, we're trying to rank guys that we'd like to go after. I was all over the map. I was like, I want Rudy Gay, but Satoransky makes sense. And some of it might just come down to, who's available at the right price. Like if the Bulls are willing to move off of Satoransky's money, but you can't go get a Patty Mills, the decision is made for you. I do love the idea of Rudy Gay, and I do think that should be one of your first calls. Again, sort of along the same lines of with Patty Mills. You have a guy who has a relationship with Ime Udoka, a well-respected veteran who can still go get buckets even at 35 years old, who gives you the size you desperately need at that 4 position, can play some 4, can play 5 in small ball lineups, again, has been around and who's probably looking to finish his career with one last chance to win a title. I think I'd probably put Patty Mills second in line. Everyone thinks I'm this big Satoransky stan, and maybe I am. I quite enjoy his game, and I love his idea of adding size at that point guard position. I just think it makes the most sense. It's a pretty obvious move that if he's available for the Celtics to consider. And again, someone who has some veteran experience, but more just can hit threes, can play sound ball, can be a facilitator. I really like the idea of that. Kyle Anderson is at the top of my list as well. I just don't know necessarily if you can get him out of Memphis without splurging on assets. And as we just sort of detailed, I think you can't give up first round picks where it gets really prohibitive in terms of being able to go get your next star. So Brad's going to figure out a way to be creative, Brad and that whole front office staff. And we'll see if they're able to do that. James Edward J_Celtics asks, won't our bench depth be a lot better if we just re-sign Fournier rather than throwing half of our team and picks, not including JB, to go get Bradley Beal? No, this is fair. And again, it comes down to what the price is for Bradley Beal. But any roadmap to a third star is going to trim your depth no matter what. So whether you re-sign Evan Fournier and extend Marcus Smart, again, there's going to be avenues here where you're going to have to trim talent at some point. I like the idea of keeping Fournier just because you have him right now. You have his bird rights. You can overspend to keep him and then just figure it out down the road. And look, sometimes that backfires against teams. If Evan Fournier comes out next year and just either gets hurt or doesn't play to a level capable of what we've seen in the past, like now it's harder to get off that money. But I think on a reasonable deal, there's going to be interest and there's going to be teams out there that want to add a player like that, especially if he's under contract long-term. So I don't ever worry about signing it, but it's all part of the puzzle about how they're going to put this thing together. I like this one. All right. Scott Creamy asked, any chance last year was just a perfect storm of bad luck, COVID, injuries, and short off season, and this team is actually really good? I've convinced myself of this a few times, and yet I think history suggests over the course of a 72 game season, you are what you are. And it's undeniable that I want to see what the Celtics team look like whole. I just think Jayson Tatum not going through COVID, Marcus Smart not being injured and knowing his role as a point guard, Jaylen Brown having a full season to continue his development. And again, the hand surgery might throw a wrinkle in that, but if he's able to come back and take more strides, maybe he'll find creative ways this offseason to improve even without a true offseason. Due to the hand, I think there is a world where this team is pretty good and has the right parts to be successful. Part of that will hinge again on how much better does Jayson Tatum get? How much better does Jaylen Brown get next season? Do these pieces complement each other? And I don't know if we got that answer last year. It's just such a weird year where they've rarely had their starting lineup. Does a better supporting cast take some of the pressure off that core group and allow them to sort of blossom more? So while I probably lean a little bit more towards it wasn't just bad luck, I'm the first in line to say that I want to see how it looks and how exactly this all plays out. All right, a couple more before we dive into the interview with Chris Miller. All right, let's go here with Celtics Purgatory, whose username is actually Celtics Trash Takes. Could actually be my username because people don't seem to like my takes lately. But if you had to pick one guy to stay on the Celtics this year, would it be Nesmith or Romeo Langford? There is only one right answer here. I'm worried that I'm going to pick the wrong answer here. I'm going to assume that Celtics Trash Takes, despite the username, is bullish on Aaron Nesmith's future based on the hustle we saw last year, his three-point shooting ability, and the fact that Romeo Langford, after having been injured for the first 2 years of his pro career and showing glimpses, has probably a longer path forward in terms of proving what he is at this level. So ideally, I think you're intrigued to see where both go. I do think Romeo Langford has the potential to be a very good player. But yeah, if you're asking me if I had to pick one, I'm probably hitching my wagon to Nesmith. I just think shooting in the NBA is a premium, especially when you have a Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown core. You need guys who you can spray the ball to and are able to hit shots. And so I am very intrigued to see if Nesmith can continue to develop in that role. I love the hustle. Even before we knew the shooting was going to come along last year, guys don't typically just forget how to shoot and when they get to the NBA level. And I thought that was going to translate with Nesmith. It was how does he impact games otherwise? And we saw hustle and getting it on the glass and making just those crazy plays to impact the game. And so really intrigued to see if he can just continue to blossom in that role. Can he be an impact defender, use his length? That's part of the reason that Romeo is so curious. Like, he was able to go out there and defend the Hardens of the world in the playoffs. That long wingspan, could really help him be an impact defender, but he's got to get the offensive game to catch up to where he's at as a defender. I just think he needs his intensity level to go up, because Romeo Langford can't just ease into games. He can't just ease into assignments. He has to go out there and show that he can be a different player. All right, we're going to pause the mailbag right there. I want to dive into our interview with Chris Miller from NBC Sports Washington. Before we do that, as always, need you guys to go like, subscribe, go check us out on the YouTube page, like there, add us on your YouTube so you get notified whenever new videos are available. Also, make sure you check us out later this week. The NBA draft is coming up. Didn't have a lot of draft questions in the mailbag. Understandably so. The Celtics only have the 45th pick. We'll see if they do some wheeling and dealing. Maybe they can move up higher in the second round. Maybe there's a late first round pick available. But if nothing else, we're going to have some interesting draft fallout. Draft night is always crazy. It starts the ramp up to free agency. Maybe we'll get a better idea of what the Celtics have up their sleeves. We'll also get a chance to catch up with Brad Stevens that night as part of our coverage on NBC Sports Boston. So you can check that interview out on the podcast later this week. All right, you guys waited this long. I know we had a little bit of Bradley Beal talk in the pod, but had to get Chris back on to dive into what's ahead, his future in Washington. Let's get into that interview with Chris Miller. All right, Chris Miller, I can't believe you haven't blocked all 617, 781, 508s. Everybody, when there is a sniff of a Bradley Beal rumor, who reach out to you and want to discuss the potential of Bradley Beal being pried away from the Washington Wizards. But let's start there. Over the weekend, multiple reports that Bradley Beal is pondering his future. Now, I think everybody ponders their future at some point or another. And so certainly he has some decisions to make coming up. What do you make of the latest scuttlebutt regarding Bradley Beal?
Well, the only area code Boston number that I would pick up is yours, Forsberg. So you should be honored and privileged. I just feel like we've been down this road. Last year kind of picked up, like, where will he go? Miami was doing some heavy recruiting. Heat Nation was off the charts in terms of their love affair and recruitment of Brad. And then, he goes to Team USA, where literally I was told that, even the equipment, people were recruiting Brad. I mean, it got to the point where it's like, you're tampering so much that Adam Silver should have flew to Vegas before all this happened and said, listen, stop it. But here we are again. And I've always said this, Chris, until Brad or his agent, Mark Bartelstein, pick up the phone and calls Tommy Shepard and say, we're ready to move on.
Right.
It's just noise. But on a level of 1 to 10, where the noise is now, it's 11.
Ooh.
Because now it's just a lot of people are like trying to put 2 and 2 together with other teams. And, jokingly, I've been on with you a couple times. We've talked about the Boston angle with Tatum. It totally makes sense. Jason, you were tampering in Vegas too. But yeah, it's I would say Chris is probably at an all-time high right now.
Wow. So I need the Washington perspective on all this. Where are fans at? Like, when you talk to your friends, when you talk to people down there, because I mean, it's got to be frustrating for them as well. Like, this is their guy, and the guy who's shown a lot of loyalty. Are fans, because I think there's always this sort of tipping point where when the noise gets to a level where it starts to turn, and some guys are like, all right, you know what? Like, if we're just going to live in this perpetual, is he going to be here? Is he not going to be here? Like, let's get the next iteration. Let's make this trade. Like, where are fans at right now in terms of the Bradley Beal saga?
It's interesting. It's 50-50. I have some friends that are fans of the team that's like, no, this is our guy. His number's going to be in the rafters. He's going into his 10th year. No, this is the face of our franchise. No, we're not letting him go. But then there are other fans who think about this, Chris, and they go, well, wait a minute. If the team is going to put a 4-year extension on the table in October, and he has really all year to sign the extension, and he doesn't, then the Wizards should behoove themselves to be like, okay, well, I don't think we can get a better package for Bradley Beal than right now.
Yeah.
Right. We can't get the amount of assets that we really want, unless we do it, now to save the franchise from not getting up nothing and letting him walk away. So I would say for the people that I talk to, it's kind of 50-50. And the people that were like, well, maybe we should move on from, they're not mad at him. They understand it. Listen, he gave 9 years of his career to this franchise. So they understand it that way. And then you have some fans that are just crazy and just like, why would he want to leave us? Or, let's get if it's Golden State, give us their picks for the next 20 years. And could you throw in like Steph Curry? So there are those crazy fans. But I think everyone, if you just take a step back and kind of understand it, he probably is mulling his future. And, Wizards clearly have a new head coach in Wes Unseld Jr. They're trying to develop young players, and they've got. See, this is the interesting thing, Chris. I find it hard. Maybe it's just me. I find it hard to have two players like Westbrook and Beal, and then on the other side, you have these young players that you're trying to develop. My question then is, what are we doing here? Are you trying to compete for a championship, or are you trying to develop these players so one day they level up? But the problem is you've got so much money invested into Westbrook and Beal. Like, can you add a third piece? And I think that's where the organization is right now, trying to figure out.
It's fascinating. And so I'm so locked on the Celtics, but when I hear other cities talking about this, it's like everyone's in the same boat. You can only commit so much to your core, but if you're trying to win, you can't commit to player development. And the Celtics have struggled with that. Maybe Brad Stevens' biggest blind spot since he's been in Boston is developing young players at the same time trying to be competitive, because it's hard to play an Aaron Nesmith when you're trying to win 50 games. You can't give him the freedom to make mistakes. And so I do think Washington's running into a little bit of that. You got to start developing those young lottery guys and wonder if they are the next sort of wave of where this program will go. And you want that to coincide with Bradley Beal's timeline, but it's just tough. It's, guys get older. Like, what track are you on?
It makes you think about like what Golden State did, and you have a greater appreciation for that.
100%.
They figured out, we're going to get Curry, we're going to get Klay Thompson, we're going to get Draymond. That's our core. And we're going to build with them. And then when they were ready to be championship level, they brought in the Sean Livingstons, the Andre Iguodalas of the world. And then all of a sudden it just worked, right? And then they were able to bring in a guy like Kevin Durant. And you're like, wait a minute, how were they able to bring him in? Because they were able to do something, like you said, Chris, that a lot of teams have a lot of difficulty with. It's like, how do we get high quality franchise players, pay them max money, and then bring in the requisite pieces to help us be championship level? That, again, you tip your hat to what the Golden State Warriors were able to do and still able to do, because they're a team that's in the Bradley Beal conversation right now. Why? Because they have the assets to offer.
Yeah, it's crazy. And even I think about the NBA Finals this year, Phoenix building that young nucleus, then you bring in Chris Paul, go up to Milwaukee, have Giannis and Middleton. And sure, it helps to have a generational talent that you drafted and all that, but then you had to go get Jrue Holiday to sort of push you over the top. So it's just all such a process and how it goes together. It's funny you bring up Golden State. I think Celtics fans, they're the one team where, like, the Celtics keep saying, Celtics fans are in this maybe somewhat irrational spot where they're like, well, Bradley Beal is definitely coming to Boston because he's going to want to play with Jayson Tatum, and that'll lower the price, and there's ways to power play, and we'll get into all that. But, you look at a team like Golden State, who has young talent, who has draft picks because of the sort of weird period they're going through with injuries. Like, they can get in on the mix. How much would that, do you think that's a consideration to Washington as they look at potential roadmap forward? Like, is the Golden State package attractive enough to make them consider moving on from Bradley Beal?
So that package is James Wiseman. It's Wiggins, Andrew Wiggins, 7 and maybe 14. I mean, I love this draft, Chris. It's just me. I think you're going to get value throughout this draft with the players. So if you're telling me you can get 7 and 14 and Wiseman, and Wiggins is, he's a good player, but is he someone that you want to try to build around long-term? Probably not. So I think the 7th pick and Wiseman, if you think Wiseman is going to be the guy, maybe he just needs to get out of Golden State and go somewhere where he can kind of grow, then that's a really good package. Another one to think about is Toronto.
Ooh.
I guess Siakam is on the block and maybe number 4. If you're telling me the 4th pick in Siakam, I'm greedy. I would ask for Anunoby. I'd ask for Boucher. That's just me. I mean,
the CN Tower, like whatever else you can throw in there, right?
Chris, what's the worst thing they could say? No. I mean, so, I think Tommy Shepard is in a really interesting situation. Again, I will go back to this. Until he hears from Beal or his representative that he's ready to go, I would tell other teams, get your packages together, because this is going to be an interesting week. It's draft week. Who are you picking? Is this for you or is this for somebody else? And I was just looking this up yesterday, just from the Wizards standpoint. And I don't know if you guys really thought about this. There are so many teams that have multiple picks in this year's draft, multiple second round picks up in this like 35 and 32. I still think you're going to get value there. So teams, the Wizards don't have a second round pick. So it would be smart if they maybe purchase one of them. So there's just a lot of, but I would love to be in the war room today because there's just so much talk and there's so many phone calls and hang-ups and caller IDs coming up and all this. But, the Wizards are in an interesting situation. And Boston, I laugh because it's like, Brad's not going to Boston. But it makes sense for the Celtics to, make a call.
Yeah. And so, and I feel like I don't know if I need to re-explain this every time we do this, but the roadmap for the Celtics is essentially you need not only for Bradley Beal to say, hey, I want out, I'm not going to resign after this year and put pressure on the Wizards, but he has to legitimately come out after that and say, and oh, by the way, the only place I want to go is Boston, because then if you're Golden State, you're going, are we giving up 7-14 Wiseman, Wiggins on the chance that this guy's a 1-year rental? Probably not. And so is that likely? I've long said no, because I don't think that's the kind of guy Bradley Beal is. But in a league where you have to ponder your future, where you have to ponder ways that you get to play with guys you want to play with, I just think there is an opportunity there. The other part for the Celtics is just Brad gets to the free agency. He either doesn't pick up his player option next year or whether it's 2023, and then he's out there. And the Celtics do have a roadmap to cap space. It's muddy. They'd have to move on from Marcus Smart and Evan Fournier, and there'd be a lot of prickly stuff along the way.
After the way Fournier played the other night against Team USA.
I'm ready to max him out.
Did he make enough money? I think he made some money.
It's so funny. And I sit there and I say, no good GM is going to sit there and now overpay Evan Fournier based on 40 minutes against a underwhelming Team USA. And then I go, no, we live in a world of recency bias where a GM is going to see that and go, man, Evan Fournier is on the free agent market. Maybe $20 million a year isn't a bad idea. And Brad Stevens is sitting there going, oh no, don't allow him to be priced out. Him, Patty Mills, who is just an international assassin for the Aussies. And so I think a lot of these guys are going to have a chance to make themselves money. Ironically, I thought Jayson Tatum going overseas, the biggest benefit for him besides recruiting Bradley Beal would be to sort of elevate his own stature, and he hasn't done it. And my listeners will have to hear me kind of bemoan that after this of 9 points and 3 of 9 shooting, whatever it was. Not the greatest Olympic opener for Jayson Tatum, and they've got to figure that out. But let me I laid it out there. You've laughed at me every time I've done it, and I feel like you've turned a little bit of a corner. You're acknowledging that there is some, Brad's got to ponder his future. Are Boston fans still irrational for holding out this hope that something can materialize?
I would say this. Listen, the Tatum thing is real. I mean, Bradley would have never considered Boston if Tatum wasn't there.
Right.
Okay, let's just be honest. He would have never considered it, but that's a thing. And before he had to leave due to COVID, he had some really good synergy with Jayson, and those daily conversations didn't hurt the Celtics' chances. I mean, Ime Udoka was there also. You don't think he was talking to Brad about, hey, I could run a set here? I think you even mentioned this.
Yeah,
hey,
when we were on early edition, I said, if you're the Celtics and you're trying to put on the full court press, you got Brad Stevens up in the rafters, like smiling down. You've got Ime Udoka over there going, man, do you see that way that Jayson kicked it out to you in the corner? We could run a few sets like that in Boston. Yeah, you put on the full court press.
But I think the Celtics definitely are in the conversation. Legacy is real, man. Again, I joke. Every time I walk into that arena, I look up and I just see, man, there's a lot of championships up there. And if you're a player, you have to look at that also and just look at the legacy of the franchise. Miami is another team. I mean, listen,
Miami's always in the mix because they got Pat Riley
always.
and they got weather, and then
always,
yeah,
and no state income tax, right? It's like, where did
right?
Chris, give me your top 3 reasons? Is it Riles, no state income tax, weather? Is it weather, Riles, no state income? I mean, Miami's got,
the Massachusetts guy always picks weather because I don't understand why I live here except for this time of year. But and then it's probably Riley because I just think he's so influential. And then maybe the state. Yeah, I'm making, if I'm Bradley Beal and I'm making $40 million a year after this season, the income tax helps, but I've got money.
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many teams that could put together really good offers, and for Washington, they have to make a decision. Here's the decision. So if Brad does say this, what do you do with Westbrook? You're not going to keep Westbrook there. Right. This would be a full-on reset. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, especially when you have a first-year coach in Wes Unseld. You want to build with your group. I think about Orlando and seeing Jamal Mosley down there. I mean, he's going to grow with that group. That's a young group with a 5th and 8th pick in this year's draft. They've got cap space and they've got young players already. So Jamal Mosley is going to grow with Orlando. Could that be the same thing here in DC? Wes Unseld Jr. needs to succeed. I mean, he's from here. We're all rooting for him. Those of us who have been here forever, we knew him when he was actually rebounding as an assistant coach for the Wizards, and he was actually coaching the Washington Mystics. So this guy has a reputation of growing and building, and defense is his calling card. So we all want to see him succeed, but is he going to succeed with the group with Westbrook and Beal and then these young players? Or do you just say, hey, we're going to give you a full rebuild and let's see what happens? Because right now they're 15th. Right, I think we're picking 15th in the draft, and that's going to be a good player. But if you tell me there was a way we can get into that, top 5, top 7, now you're going to get a really good impact player.
Tommy Shepard has a lot to consider and to ponder. Part of me also wonders every time we just saw this with Lillard, right? Lillard, we hear some rumbles. Oh, he's pondering his future. He's going to request a trade in a few days. Then it sort of sounds like it was just more like, hey, get me some help, figure this thing out.
A cry for help.
Yeah. And which is understandable. And I mean, there's a lot of calamity up there in Portland right now. Our brethren up at the, NBC Northwest are trying to figure out what's going to happen with that team. But, I wonder if that's what Bradley's coming from with this a little bit too, is, hey, look, I'm pondering because I don't know the roadmap, and I want to be part of that, and I want to figure out what's next. But there's also some really encouraging moments at the end of that season. So, but that complicates things. If they had just been really bad and missed the playoffs, like you said, I think it's easier to go the nuclear route and blow this thing up. When you're sort of in that middle ground, you got to pick a road, and I'll be fascinated to see what happens. All right, I don't know if you're a betting man, and I don't mean to throw this on you, but what do you think happens? Like, what do you think how does this all play out the next week? I like, there is a world where we just get through the draft and everyone goes, okay, he's safe for now. And then we're still sitting here all season wondering if he's going to pick up that option.
Well, again, they can't offer that until October. So we have some time, but I just feel like there just needs to be a real honest conversation with all parties involved. Just put everything out on the table. What do you want? And if he says, I want to go elsewhere, then that really gets the clock started. I'm 50-50 on it. I just feel like I think he clearly wants to be here, but he wants to be here with a chance to do something special. And here's where the rubber meets the road. Who could be that third person that comes here that could help Westbrook and Beal? And how much is it going to cost? And if it's out of their price range, they're not going to do it. And then he has to make that decision. Then if you can't get me a third person, then I've got to consider my options. The beauty of this is he has options and the Wizards have options. Keep that in mind, Chris. Everybody has options in this one. It's not like one has leverage over the other. They both, again, could sit in a room, Zoom or otherwise, and have a real honest conversation on what they want to do with this organization moving forward. Wow. And either way, I think they will be in a good situation.
Yeah. Again, I am fascinated to watch it play out. it's just, again, I don't envy Tommy Shepard's job. Like, there's a lot of tough decisions ahead. I think they made a right choice with the coach, and I think that's going to be awesome for you guys down there. But I can't wait to see what team he is coaching, because
let me ask you a question. If Beal actually comes to Boston, are you going to call me back again?
You'll be actually.
You might be asking me like, "Hey, Chris, so what's Brad like on a daily?"
I feel like we should ask you that now. Just because
just in case, right?
Part of it is especially when they do go after a major free agent or a major guy, that's usually the line of questioning. But because we just take it as gospel that him and Jayson are such good friends, I think people up here are just like, yeah, whatever. He could, as long as he's happy, and he always smiles. So there's not any concern.
The beauty with him, Chris, is his game and his personality fits on all 30 teams. And that's a real compliment that you can give someone, because there's not a lot of, you can't say that about a lot of players, like their personality and their game fits anywhere.
Yeah.
His ability to score efficiently, his ability to kind of read the room. He's a 2 ears, 1 mouth type person, which means he collects a lot of data before he opens his mouth, is a strong suit. I believe. And that's why I say, I think his game and his personality fits in any locker room.
Well, there's a lot of Celtics fans that are, as they ponder what's next, they do wonder, is there enough basketballs? If say the Celtic dream scenario plays out and you have Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown and Bradley Beal, are there enough shots for everybody?
Because Brad could actually play point guard.
And so
that's been working on that.
And so I think that's the intriguing part. And even when he was at Team USA, we heard him say, I want to be an impact defender. That's music to Celtic players' ears after going through smaller guards with Kemba and IT and Kyrie. The idea that someone who wants to be better and can play that point guard spot, but has the versatility to just play off of those guys and hit shots. So ultimately, talent is king, and you figure it out. You just get all the talent, and then you figure out how it works. No one knew how Bradley and Russell would necessarily work together. Well, along the way, they figured it out. So, let's see if we cross that bridge. But I can tell you that by the time you hang up this call, my producers will have probably sent you emails about early edition tonight, and probably we should just make it a standing reservation until there's closure with Bradley Beal, because Chris Miller.
I'm here for all the smoke. I'm here.
Go rest up. I hope you actually get a little bit of a summer here, but the Bradley Beal watch is on, and I can't wait to see how it plays out. Chris Miller, it's going to be a busy off season. Get your rest where you can, be ready. But thank you as always for jumping on the Celtics Talk podcast. I don't think this will be the last time.
I'm here for you, Chris.